Okay, in this next section of the lecture, I'm going to be telling you the secret that jerks use in order to ensnare women into relationships. And if you can understand this, you're also going to recognize how often women have used this on men. If you or anybody you know got trapped in a dysfunctional relationship, once you understand this, you'll understand how to get out of it, how to avoid it, and best of all, how to make sure that it never happens to you again. So much of what I teach is all about how to qualify somebody, how to categorize them into a certain category of your life. This is where it all comes from. So if you can understand this, guys, and I'm asking you to give me as much attention as you can here. Understand this, you are going to have an incredibly powerful frame so that very few people are going to be able to penetrate you with this. Are you ready with this? Okay, here it is. The initial image that a person forms of you, especially over the first few interactions, will dictate how everything else you do in your relationship with that person gets filtered. Which means that if you have a really positive first impression over the course of, let's say, your first interactions with a person, then when bad things start happening later on, you still will filter those new mistakes, new behaviors, through the eyes of the initial impression you came up with. Now, we all do this in the other areas of our lives, so I'm going to take a very specific example. You're in a work situation. You have a very first good impression of one of the new coworkers who starts in your company. You might even get a chance to get to know that coworker over the several weeks, having lunch with them occasionally, working with them on smaller projects. And about 6 to 8 months later, that coworker commits a behavior that you look at and you say, you know what? That doesn't sound right. Somebody comes up to you and says, do you know what that coworker did? That coworker did blank. And you're sitting there and you're scratching your head. You said, but that's not a behavior associated with that coworker. You are much more likely to give that coworker the benefit of the doubt before you believe in any rumors and gossip. Now the question is why? Do you know that coworker intimately? Do you have a video camera surveilling that coworker all the time? No. You don't really know. But you have developed a certain image of that person in your mind. And everything that you hear gets interpreted through that image. To the point where you might even say, you know what? Let's say it's true that coworker did something. It's got to be because they didn't realize what they were doing. Or it's got to be because, maybe somebody just didn't explain to them what was expected. So you try to rationalize it. You try to justify it. Now, as men in that type of situation, assuming that you have a certain responsibility in that job, you would have to go to that coworker and say, excuse me, this has come to my attention. Can you let me know what your side is? And we would have to make a rational judgment at that point. Now, we do this in all areas of our lives. Now, what happens when we start attaching emotions to those impressions? What happens when we start building up somebody in our minds because we really like them and we see a potential relationship with that person? You think it's difficult just dealing with somebody who's a coworker with that first impression, that first filter that's being created? When you apply it to long-term relationships, it becomes devastating. I dated a woman once for over a year, and I couldn't figure out how the hell I ended up with a person like that. And I'll tell you how. Because in those first few dates, those first few sexual experiences, I had formed a particular image of who she was. To the point where, when bad behaviors from her started coming up, I still interpreted as through that first impression. Well, she's not really violating my emotional need. She's just sort of behaving like a little kid because she never learned any better. Because part of the image I had of her when we first met was that, well, she still was a little immature and she needed to grow up, but it was so cute and so sweet. And over a year later, she's doing things that's just absolutely uncalled for. And I say, get the hell away from me. Now we're going to apply this to jerks. Most jerks don't exhibit the jerk-like behavior that I described at the beginning of the relationship. For those first few interactions, they behave a certain way that's not themselves, so that she forms a certain image of, oh, he's this sort of guy. He plays on the archetypes of what that Prince Charming is supposed to be like. He plays on those archetypes of what she's really looking for, and wow, he's such an amazing man. And then slowly the bad behaviors start creeping in. So that even when he's beating her, cheating on her, wrecking certain areas of her life, it's always interpreted through that initial image he had of him. Now, at some point, I'm going to be doing a lecture on how to turn a friend into a lover. This relates to that concept. What happens when a guy becomes a friend? It's because in his first initial interactions with a woman, he committed certain behaviors that she says, oh, you're committing those type of behaviors. I'm classifying you as a friend. Now you're in the friend category. So even if you try to do something attractive, she still sees you as a friend who's doing something attractive, as opposed to an attractive person being a friend. The jerk starts off right from the beginning as a potential lover material. Right from the beginning, he's addressing her emotional needs in a different way so that once they get into a relationship and the bad behaviors start coming up, she's interpreting those initial red flags, those initial signs, through her image of him initially. Here's an example. She started to date the guy. They're maybe now dating for about 3-4 months. They're out in a public setting and he freaks out because some guy looked at her funny. He embarrasses her. They get back home and he starts wailing into her. How could you let that guy look at you like that? Didn't you see that? How could you humiliate me like that? Now, is she going to see this as a red flag, or is she going to interpret it through the initial image she had of him of, well,